I'm Stephen Ribello, and I'm the author of Alfred Hitchcock and the Making of Shyko, and it's my pleasure to be your companion on this special DVD edition of Alfred Hitchcock's 47th film, Shyko. Shyko was unleashed on audiences in June of 1960, and it's really no exaggeration to say that movies haven't been the same since. Nearly 50 years later, we're still talking about, arguing about, writing about, and dissecting Shyko, still uncovering layers of meaning, symbolism, and complexity. Most importantly, though, we're still enjoying it as a beautifully made, scary, groundbreaking, and hugely entertaining film. Hitchcock's most famous and financially successful picture, a true cultural phenomenon, Shyko has been called the first modern horror thriller. It has evoked comparisons to works by Shakespeare, Poe, Dostoevsky, the Brontes, Robert Louis Stevenson, the symphonies of Stravinsky, and that's merely the tip of the iceberg. As we go along, we're going to see how this movie defied almost all of the norms of the late 1950s and how it arrived way ahead of the curve. It announced a new era of frankness, sexuality, and explosive violence both on and off the screen. Let's take a look at this title sequence, just for example. It was the work of the innovative graphic designer Saul Bass, and he created film title sequences really that were unique in having thematic and emotional connections to the films they preceded. Here, his frenetic, driving, parallel line imagery is really a perfect complement to the all-strings musical score by genius film composer Bernard Herrmann. In an article in the industry newspaper Variety on December 27, 1959, Hitchcock boasted that Shyko would open with the longest dolly shot ever attempted by helicopter, a 4-mile scene that would rival or even top Orson Welles' remarkable opening sequence for Touch of Evil, released in 1958. But complicated helicopter shots were pretty new back then, and Tyler mounts hadn't even been invented, so Hitchcock didn't get the opening he wanted, but I love this opening. It's gritty, it's sad, it's furtive, and it sets up a recurring visual pattern of the film. That is, a horizontal plane juxtaposed with a vertical. He was a man who loved to set major technical challenges for himself and his crew. And his theme in Shyko, or one of them, was voyeurism, and he got very intrigued by the notion of the camera replicating the flight of a fly that would zoom straight into a hotel room and kind of be a fly on the wall, as it were. And clearly, we're in a completely different universe from the swank Monte Carlo hotels in Hitchcock's To Catch a Thief or The Ambassador East of North by Northwest. I've always loved the sense in this scene that, almost as if in Rear Window, we might have peeked into any of these random rooms and found a compelling human story. It's like there are 8 million stories in the naked city, as the narrator used to say on the old TV show, and we're going to see one of them. Hitchcock was well known for his predilection for provocative, sexy love scenes. And with the dawn of the 1960s, he believed that audiences wanted their love scenes to be, more frank and closer to the way people live their lives. You see, unlike the characters of most of Hitchcock's American thrillers, the characters in Shyko are workaday, average people. They're pretty, but certainly they're a little careworn and frayed around the edges. So here, John Gavin is shirtless, Janet Leigh is in a white bra and slip. They're not married, they're horizontal, the language is bolder, and they've just made love in a cheap hotel on a hot afternoon during a long lunch break. Very, very pushy stuff for mainstream American movies in 1960.
In public.
Oh, we can see each other. We can even have dinner. But respectably.
The leading man here is John Gavin, a very popular rising star under contract to Universal and being groomed as a successor to Rock Hudson. He was fairly new and inexperienced and very shy about his physical attributes, which made him very uncomfortable doing this scene.
All right. Marion, whenever it's possible, I want to see you. And under any circumstances, even respectability.
You make respectability sound disrespectful.
Oh, no.
Incidentally, this sequence lays down the recurring theme of secretiveness and furtiveness, and it proved to be something of an audition for screenwriter Joseph Stefano. Stefano was the second screenwriter involved on Shyko. The first was James Kavanaugh, an Emmy winner who had done several episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, the weekly TV show that had been on the air since 1955. Kavanaugh's screenplay didn't exactly pass muster, so Joseph Stefano was hired, but he was hired provisionally. Stefano was a former musician. He'd won attention for The Black Orchid, a mafia film, love story really, starring Sophia Loren, that was done by Paramount. He was a young, brash, very talented newcomer with a very strong, sharp, twisted sense of humor. Hitchcock really didn't like working with new people, especially new young people. So he kind of hedged his bets about Stefano until the writer turned in the sequence we're now seeing. The biggest compliment you could ever get from Hitchcock was that his wife, who had been a film editor and his trusted behind-the-scenes collaborator, would look at a scene or look at a script or look at an actor, and if she really liked something, Hitchcock would later tell that person, Alma loved it. Well, Alma loved this scene, and Stefano was hired.
Don't miss your plane.
Hey, we can leave together, can't we?
I'm late, and you have to put your shoes on.
Here we have Janet Leigh in all white in her good girl mode, passing a very familiar figure loitering outside. That's Alfred Hitchcock, of course. And here's another Hitchcock, his and Alma's only child, Patricia Hitchcock, who had acted on Broadway, on television, and in her father's film Strangers on a Train and Stage Fright. Note that the dialogue given to the chatty character played by Patricia restates certain themes, lies and deception. Her mother gave her tranquilizers on the day of her wedding, and she had not told her new husband, a very wry commentary on wedded bliss.
Oh, your sister called to say she's going to Tucson to do some buying, and she'll be gone the whole weekend. And
also note the casual menace in which the character mentions how her husband had called and her mother had called to see if he had called. Marion has no husband, only a sister telling her that she'll be away all weekend. It's a terrific scene. We're introduced to Marion's ineffectual boss. We also meet Cassidy, the oil millionaire, a lech who tries to put the make on her. Note his boasting about buying off unhappiness in the vulgar way he throws around $40,000 cash to buy his 18-year-old daughter a house as a wedding present. In the previous scene, of course, Marion and Sam, who are a lot older than 18, can't marry because of finances.
And she never had an unhappy day in any one of those years.
Come on, Tom. My office is air-conditioned.
Do you know what I do about unhappiness? I buy it off. Are you unhappy?
Not inordinately.
I'm buying this house for my baby's wedding present. $40,000 cash. Now, that's not buying happiness. That's just buying off unhappiness.
It's remarkable to consider how starkly different Shyko looks and sounds compared to Hitchcock's just two previous films, North by Northwest and Vertigo. Those were both lush, Technicolor, big movies that kind of epitomized the director as a maker of huge, glamorous entertainments. But Hitchcock, in his late 50s when he made Shyko, was out to do something entirely different. A film of modest budget, roughly $800,000, which is, by the way, about 1/5 of the cost of North by Northwest. Shyko was done on a completely tight shooting schedule, one that allowed for bold experimentation, pushiness, and even subversiveness. Shyko was in part influenced by the 1955 international smash hit film Les Diaboliques, directed by Henri-Georges Clouzot. That was also in black and white. It featured grimy everyday settings and characters, and featured a knockout scare sequence in a very white bathroom, as well as a twist ending. Hitchcock loved that film. He envied its ruthlessness, its economy, and the screams it ripped from the throats of moviegoers. Diabolique was frank and adult, and so would Shyko be. Hitchcock was out to make a film that not only amused him, but was absolutely unlike anything anyone had seen before. It was a film that would also reinvent Hitchcock for a brand new generation.
If you don't mind, I'd like to go right on home after.
Hitchcock had been taking a look around, and he saw that low-budget horror movies were really making a fortune at the box office, and he wondered, what if somebody really talented made one of those? And he found in the New York Times Review of Books a very strong review for a novel by Robert Bloch called Shyko. He bought the screen rights anonymously for about $9,000, and he stunned his longtime colleagues by announcing that he wanted to make a small, modestly scaled horror movie that would just scare the pants off people.
Then go home and sleep.
One of his most brilliant moves was to hire Janet Leigh to play Marion Crane. At the time, she was a hugely popular, lovely, and physically stunning movie star, most often associated, though, with light comedies, musicals, and period epics. In those days, she rarely got a chance to do dramatic roles aside from things like Touch of Evil for Orson Welles. Meanwhile, a very significant change in costume. Now, she's wearing a black half-slip and a bra. This was a deliberate choice on Hitchcock's part to show the duality in the character's nature. Note how Hitchcock keeps the camera close and intimate on Janet Leigh. It's drawing in the audience. Marion, with a very significant wall mirror placed behind her, reveals the duality of her personality as she has made a decision to impulsively steal $40,000. Hitchcock was a brilliant technician who knew camera lenses as well as any cinematographer. Because he wanted the camera to be the eyes of the audience and wanted the audience to feel that they were seeing the events with their own eyes, he insisted that his cameraman film the entire movie using 50mm lenses. 50mm lenses give the closest approximation to human vision available at that time. Again, the theme is voyeurism. Note also how often he cuts back to the money in the envelope. Should she take it? Should she stop before it's too late? Through performance, camera placement, and tense, anxiety-ridden music, we're not only brought into the character's thought processes, but into her mind state and emotions. The driving scenes were accomplished on the soundstage using a cutout car and rear projection, with Hitchcock himself just off camera voicing the character's inner fears and helping guide Janet Leigh's strong and persuasive performance. By the way, notice the Christmas decorations strung over the streets of Phoenix. That was a glitch that occurred during second unit filming in Arizona. It was Christmas time, but Hitchcock hadn't planned on the movies being set during the holiday, so because those decorations happened to be there, that's why in the opening of the film there are titles that list the date as December the 11th, Friday, December the 11th to be exact. Hitchcock called this his 30-day picture. Principal photography took place from November 11, 1959 through February 1st, 1960. To keep the costs down, Hitchcock used his reliable and trusted members of his TV show crew, including cinematographer John L. Russell and assistant director Hilton A. Green. But the film cost so little to make and was filmed so quickly and efficiently because Hitchcock and his associates had lavished all the prep time and all the pre-planning as they would for any other major Hitchcock feature. The preparation included storyboarding every scene and camera angle. For this scene, Janet Leigh's section of the film, the director sent his colleagues to research and photograph the details of the life and living situation of a typical 30-year-old secretary living in Phoenix. Hitchcock had a very well-known fear of policemen, and that comes across very strongly in this sequence. He owned a driver's license, but drove quite badly, and his wife often did the driving. The actor Mort Mills plays the highway patrolman here, and in keeping the film's motif very, very squarely, It's about reflective surfaces and mirrors, so he wears dark glasses that make him menacing and inscrutable. He says very little, he implies a great deal, and he represents authority as merciless, unyielding, and almost inhuman. One of the many dark jokes in the script is the police saying to Marion that she shouldn't have slept in her car. She should have gone to one of the many local motels, quote, just to be safe. All of these shots in this sequence are so beautifully composed. Mills, by the way, reunited with Hitchcock 6 years later for a brief role as a spy posing as a farmer in Torn Curtain.
I've told you there's nothing wrong, except that I'm in a hurry and you're taking up my time.
Now, just a moment. Turn your motor off, please. May I see your license?
Why?
Please.
Hitchcock had wonderful relationships with actors he respected and admired. He wasn't one to give a lot of praise, but he would adjust a performance only if he needed that adjustment, or if the performance didn't square with kind of his preordained way of telling the story and moving the camera. Janet Leigh utterly won him over when he learned that prior to production she had written an entire history of Marion Crane pretty much from birth and filled with specific, intimate details. I spent a lot of time with Janet Leigh at one point, and she had a marvelous, easy laugh and blushed very easily, and that's something that Perkins and Hitchcock had to have found irresistible. And they did. Watch how Hitchcock builds up the tension and conveys Marion's guilt and nervousness and dual nature by having her look in a rearview mirror. Watch her hands during this sequence, full of tension, full of menace. It's interesting to note in Shyko that all the cars are Ford Company motor cars because Ford sponsored many of the shows filmed at Review Studios at Universal, including Hitchcock's TV show. Hitchcock filmed this particular sequence at a car lot on Lancashire Boulevard, very close to Universal. Today it's a BMW dealership. The sequence is a great demonstration of Hitchcock's use of subjective camera technique as a means of sort of intensifying audience identification with a character. Hence, the camera moves with Janet Leigh, so we, the audience members, move with her. What she sees, the license plate from different states, are what we see, and that lets us into her thought processes. I've watched this film with audiences and students many times over the years, and they seem to become annoyed with Janet Leigh's character at this point. They've often told me, she acts so suspiciously, she's stupid. Of course, audiences always feel that they're smarter than the characters, but you have to remember that Marion isn't a cool practice thief. She's doing this out of passion, she's doing this out of impulse, and she's almost doing it in a fugue state. She's confused, she's troubled, and she isn't thinking clearly.
I'm in no mood for trouble.
What?
There's an old saying, the first customer of the day is always the most trouble. But like I say, I'm in no mood for it, so I'm going to treat you so fair and square that you won't have one human reason to give me.
Can I trade my car in and take another?
Do anything you've a mind to. Being a woman, you will. That yours?
Yes, there's nothing wrong with it. I just...
Sick of the sight of it. Well, why don't you have a look around here and see if there's something to strike your eyes? Meanwhile, I'll have my mechanic give yours the once over. You want some coffee? I was just about
No, thank you. I'm in a hurry, and I just want to make a change.
One thing people never ought to be when they're buying used cars, and that's in a hurry. But like I said, it's too nice a day to argue. I'll shoot your car in the garage here.
Notice how the policeman keeps watching, observing, and judging. and we see Marion looking toward him, and then we see the policeman from her point of view once again. Of course, with digital now, you can clearly read the address across the street as the now long-gone Shyko Restaurant and Dance Club at 4269 Lancashire, close to Universal Studios.
It looks fine. How much would it be with my car?
You mean you don't want the usual day and a half to think it over? You are in a hurry, aren't you? Somebody chasing you?
The opening half hour of the film in this particular section, and even some of the latter sections of the film, are very much in the style of Alfred Hitchcock Presents episodes, notably one called One More Mile to Go from 1957, actually directed by Hitchcock from a teleplay by James Cavanaugh, who was the first screenwriter of Shyko.
All right.
I take it you can prove that car is yours. I mean, out-of-state license and all. You got your pink slip and
I believe I have the necessary papers. Is there a ladies' room?
in the building. Over there.
Notice how Hitchcock shoots this sequence in the bathroom from above. It's Marion and, once again, a mirror. Duality, duplicity. There's her slight hesitation. Is she doing the right thing? But again, she's in a fugue state. She's doing this out of impulse. She doesn't know what she's doing. This, for the actors among you, is also a good example of space work, which is a term that is used by directors and actors to, it's when an actor will draw in the audience and the director will draw in the audience by bringing the camera or the movement in really close and intensely so that it involves the audience in the action.
I think you better take it for a trial spin. I don't want any bad word of mouth about California Charlie.
I'd really rather not. Can't we just settle this and...
I might as well be perfectly honest with you, ma'am. It's not that I don't trust you, but...
But what? Is there anything so terribly wrong about making a decision and wanting to hurry? Do you think I've stolen my car?
Oh, ma'am. All right, let's go inside.
By the way, if you've ever been curious about what kind of car Alfred Hitchcock owned at this time, this sequence solves the mystery. Look very closely and you'll see that a black Cadillac coupe drives by twice in the same direction. That's actually Alfred Hitchcock's car making a cameo appearance.
Hey!
Just put it in here, please. Thank you.
Heck, officer, that was the first time I ever saw the customer high pressure the salesman. Somebody chasing her?
I better have a look at those papers, Charlie.
She looked like a wrong one to you?
Acted like one.
The only funny thing, she paid me $700 in cash.
Yes, Mr. Lowry.
Carolyn? Marion still isn't in?
No, Mr. Lowry, but then she's always a bit late on Monday mornings.
Buzz me the minute she comes in.
I always like to call this sequence Marion's long day's journey into night. It's really an extraordinary sequence because it's very much from a subjective point of view, and we see a very dark journey that she is about to undertake. Trips, voyages of any kind are very significant in Hitchcock's films. They usually signify a major change of life direction for the characters. When the sequence was being shot, Hitchcock was voicing characters right off screen for Janet Leigh. Notice how the glare of the headlights grows increasingly unpleasant. We feel the character's tension, her emotional exhaustion. It's her dark night of the soul, and Bernard Herrmann's frantic music hammers away at our nerves.
After all, Cassidy, I told you, all that cash. I'm not taking the responsibility. Oh, for heaven's sake. Girl works for you for 10 years. You trust her. All right, yes, you better come over.
Well, I ain't about to kiss off $40,000. I'll get it back, and if any of it's missing, I'll replace it with her fine, soft flesh. I'll track her, never use.
You want to keep an eye on the remarkable and troubling smile that Janet Leigh makes when her character hears the voice of the oil man Cassidy saying that if any of the $40,000 is missing, he'll replace it with her fine, soft flesh. It's almost a death skull smile, a smile of madness, and it's one that we will later see repeated in the last scene of the film by Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates. This particular scene was accomplished by Hitchcock's having the electricians concoct a 3-foot wide wheel with lights mounted on it. The wheel had a hub that could rotate 360 degrees, and to convey the sense of car headlights behind Marion going off to camera right, Hitchcock had the grips pull the lights away from the car cutout at an angle, and they'd control the spin. The lights had small baffles on the end of them, and they would shut off once they passed the camera. So as you pull the wheel away to the rear of the stage, the lights diminished in size until they were 30 or 40 feet back from the car. As the trip grows darker and more gothic, the rains come, and Bernard Herrmann's music is timed to the knife-like slash of the windshield wipers. Foreshadowing anyone? Up ahead looms Bates Motel, and unlucky enough, they have a vacancy. I love the production design for the motel, the aged cracked wood, the lawn chairs nobody sits in, and the sense of off-road with the exposed rafter tails of the roof. Let's salute the production designers Joseph Hurley and Robert Clatworthy, who created the rangy horizontal hotel juxtaposed with the vertical of the Bates house. These were built on the Universal lot. The design of the house itself was influenced by the Addams Family residence as seen in Charles Addams' cartoons in The New Yorker. But more directly, it was influenced by Edward Hopper's painting The House by the Railroad. Hitchcock described the architectural style of the Bates house as California Gothic, and this is a quote from him, or when they're particularly awful, California gingerbread. Speaking of Gothic, it's in this sequence that Shyko's full Gothic elements really kick in. A stormy night, a beautiful traveler lost in a storm, an old dark house looming with menace and a crazy woman inside. The doors of the Shyko house were from the Crocker House in San Francisco, and a tower from the house was taken from the house used in the movie Harvey, which starred James Stewart. Total cost for the Bates house, the most expensive design of the film, $15,000. The overall effect, though, was priceless. Robert Clatworthy, by the way, was Orson Welles' production designer on Touch of Evil.
I knew you must have. Nobody ever stops here anymore unless they've done that. But there's no sense dwelling on our losses. We just keep on lighting the lights and following the formalities. Your home address? Or just the town will do.
Los Angeles.
Cabin 1. It's closer in case you want anything. Right next to the
Can we possibly say enough good things about Anthony Perkins in this film? He's really magnificent, playing the guy that I call the Hamlet of psychopathic killers.
15 miles.
When screenwriter Joseph Stefano expressed to Hitchcock how very disappointed he was on reading the novel Shyko, he mentioned what he didn't want to see, let alone write. He didn't want to see a movie about a middle-aged, pudgy, unattractive, alcoholic Norman Bates, and that's pretty much the way the character is described in the book. Bloch had in part based Norman Bates and his deeds on those of real-life Wisconsin killer Ed Gein. That was the same monster, by the way, who later inspired the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Hannibal Lecter. Note the frame prints on the wall. They're birds. That's a very good touch, considering Norman's habit of taxidermy. And bird symbolism runs throughout the film, including the opening locale of Phoenix and the heroine's last name, Crane.
Just tap on the wall. I'll be in the office.
Thank you, Mr. Bates.
Norman Bates.
I love how Perkins stumbles on certain words that trouble him, like the word bathroom. I also love how he says his name, hoping that Marion will call him Norman, but she doesn't.
You know, nothing special, just sandwiches and milk, but I'd like it very much if you'd come.
If you think of Norman Bates in the novel, you would have thought, this is probably a role for, say, Rod Steiger. But Hitchcock threw Stefano for a loop by saying, what if Norman were to be played by Anthony Perkins? That's brilliant casting. Perkins was 27 years old at the time, under contract to Paramount, and a lot of money had been spent on promoting him as a sensitive, turbulent, handsome young successor to James Dean. Perkins had starred for William Wyler in Friendly Persuasion, and he'd played the troubled baseball star Jimmy Pearsall in Fear Strikes Out. He'd also played opposite Sophia Loren and Audrey Hepburn. He had a good Broadway stage career and even recorded several albums, including having a top 10 hit with a song called Moonlight Swim. He was in all of the magazines as a sensitive, offbeat teen idol. So for such a rising actor to take on a controversial role like Norman Bates, what a massive career risk, even if it did involve working for the great Hitchcock. Perkins is absolutely brilliant. He's handsome, he's boyish, he's sad, he's acutely sensitive, he's terrifying, and he's very fine-tuned. Notice how there are constant references to the money, but the money here is the MacGuffin. The MacGuffin is the thing that Hitchcock always had in his films, the thing that the spies were after, the thing that the plot was about, that the audience sort of cared about, but everyone in the movie was frantic about. Here, the $40,000 is definitely the MacGuffin. And Hitchcock keeps misdirecting us into thinking that's what the movie is about. But, of course, it isn't.
By candlelight, I suppose, in the cheap erotic fashion of young men with cheap erotic minds.
Mother, please.
And then what? After supper, music, whispers?
Mother, she's just a stranger. She's hungry and it's raining out.
Mother, she's just a stranger. As if men don't desire.
Because surprises and shocks were so important to Hitchcock in Psycho, he wanted to misdirect the audience whenever they saw or heard Mrs. Bates. So to voice Mrs. Bates, he hired several actresses, including Virginia Gregg and Jeanette Nolan, as well as a close friend of Anthony Perkins, Paul Jasmine. They all recorded Mother's dialogue. In post-production, those voices were blended and edited, sometimes word for word, to further disorient the audience. We hear with Marion this awful shrewish diatribe that not only degrades women, but also emasculates and demeans Norman. It's really chilling stuff. Food and meals are often significant in Hitchcock. We hear in Mother's Harangue her association of food and ugly appetite with sexuality. Significant things are said, powerful emotions are expressed through food, and character-specific choices of food in Hitchcock films. Here, it's sandwiches and milk. How normal, how simple, how American, and how deeply we are being misled about Norman Bates.
Don't worry about it. But as long as you fixed a supper, we may as well eat it.
It might be nicer and warmer in the office.
This is one of the most beautifully acted scenes in all of Hitchcock, and if you ask me, in all of cinema. The dynamic between these two characters, it's wonderful. It constantly shifts from guarded to friendly, to tense, to frightening, to empathetic. And all the while, the stuffed birds observe and hover menacingly. And also those paintings on the wall. They're all about seduction. They're all about rape. Another thing I really love about this scene is the silences, the pauses. They're almost like Harold Pinter. There's a sense of late night here, a kind of only two people in the world, and that gives it an exceptional, I don't know, intensity and power.
You eat like a bird.
You'd know, of course.
No, not really. Anyway, I hear the expression eats like a bird. It's really a falsity. Because birds really eat a tremendous lot. But I don't really know anything about birds. My hobby is stuffing things. You know, taxidermy. And I guess I'd just rather stuff birds because I hate the look of beasts when they're stuffed. You know, foxes and chimps. Some people even stuff dogs and cats, but, oh, I can't do that. I think only birds look well stuffed because they're kind of passive to begin with.
Hitchcock, throughout his career, had a very interesting relationship with birds and bird imagery in his films. You see it right from the 1930s. And, of course, he made one of his most famous movies in 1963, The Birds, in which he made the winged adventure really the focus of the movie. But in Shyko, birds have a very, very interesting function. They are at once observers, they are passive, they're stuffed, their power is taken away from them. But they have a real sense of menace. In a sense, Norman Bates, who says he's not very interested in birds but is interested in stuffing birds, is himself a bird of prey. But if you notice his movements, his gestures, they're very bird-like, and that was deliberate on the part of Anthony Perkins because he was a hugely intelligent actor who saw that Hitchcock had this running motif through the film of birds, as I said, setting the film in Phoenix, Arizona, a mythological bird. Marion Crane, a name from the novel, actually Mary Crane in the novel, but Crane being the name of a kind of bird as well. But in Hitchcock, birds they're kind of an agent of chaos. Birds appear at moments when something is about to twist, something is about to change, something is about to, well, really, when the bottom is about to fall out. And you hear and see this in many of Hitchcock's films, and it's really worked out beautifully here in Shyko.
And for all of it, we never budge an inch.
Sometimes we deliberately step into those traps.
I was born in mine. I don't mind it anymore.
Oh, but you should. You should mind it.
Oh, I do. But I say I don't.
You know, if anyone ever talked to me the way I heard, the way she spoke to you.
Sometimes, when she talks to me like that, I feel I'd like to go up there and curse her and leave her forever. Or at least defy her.
Shyko received mixed to indifferent reviews, but really it became overnight a watershed box office hit. It was the kind of movie that people talked about everywhere you go. It was written about in all the magazines of the time. And the film began to be reevaluated, even when it was in theaters, probably because it was making so much money. It made Hitchcock an even more enormous public figure and a very, very rich man.
He left her a little money.
But
anyway,
Shyko haunted Hitchcock for the rest of his career because with every succeeding film, he was judged, mostly unfairly, on, whether that film haunted our dreams and invaded our psyches the way Shyko did.
And the way he died. I guess it's nothing to talk about while you're eating. Anyway, it was just too great a loss for her. She had nothing left.
except you.
Well, a son is a poor substitute for a lover.
Why don't you go away?
To a private island like you?
No. Not like me.
I couldn't do that. Who'd look after her? She'd be alone up there. The fire would go out. It'd be cold and damp like a grave. If you love someone, you don't do that to them even if you hate them. You understand? I don't hate her. I hate what she's become. I hate the illness.
Wouldn't it be better if you put her someplace?
You mean an institution? A madhouse? People always call a madhouse someplace, don't they? Put her in someplace.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to sound uncaring.
What do you know about caring? Have you ever seen the inside of one of those places? Laughing.
I've always been intrigued by Norman's speech about mental institutions. How he talks about the laughing and the tears and the cruel eyes studying you. It suggests some very first-hand knowledge of mental institutions on Norman's part. Has he been committed to one? But if so, wouldn't the people of backfence gossipy Fairvale know that? It's one of the mysteries of the film. It's never explained. It's never laid out. But it just sort of sits there and hovers in the air. It's really wonderful. It's a very powerful conversation they're having. Marion, because of what Norman says to her, makes the decision to return the money and face the music, realizing we all go a little mad sometimes. Their madness is only a matter of degree. These two people are alike. They are very much like each other.
It's not as if she were a maniac, a raving thing. She just goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes. Haven't you?
Yes. Sometimes just one time can be enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman.
Norman.
Oh, you're not going back to your room already?
I'm very tired. And I'll have a long drive tomorrow, all the way back to Phoenix.
Really?
I stepped into a private trap back there, and I'd like to go back and try to pull myself out of it. Before it's too late for me, too.
Are you sure you wouldn't like to stay just a little while longer? Just for talk?
Oh, I'd like to, but...
All right. Well, I'll see you in the morning. I'll bring you some breakfast, all right? What time?
Very early. Dawn.
All right, Miss,
Crane.
Crane, that's it.
Good night.
Norman is clearly angry at being lied to by Marion, and we almost see him becoming his mother as he listens to her footfalls in the room next door and peeps through a hole watching her undress. Voyeurism is presented more darkly and disturbingly here than in Rear Window, where one of the characters says that we become a nation of voyeurs. In Shyko, we become an audience of voyeurs. Hitchcock is proving the point. We can't turn away. We know we should. But we don't, do we? Hitchcock knew that the production code would forbid him to show outright a nude woman in a shower. So to design and film the sequence for maximum impact, he worked with Saul Bass to lay out a storyboard and cutting continuity that would depict the violent and stunning murder through a montage. That is, the assembly of tiny pieces of film that, edited together, convey action and transmit emotional impact. He knew, though, that what he suggested, rather than showed, the audience members would fill in for themselves. Hitchcock paid Bass an additional $2,000 to his $10,000 salary to storyboard the ideas. Hitchcock told his cameraman, "I'm going to shoot this staccato, and I'm going to cut it staccato, so the audience won't know what the hell is going on." The impact of the shower sequence in 1960 was electrifying. There were screams, people running up the aisles. I've never experienced anything like it in a movie theater before or since. It was like an entire audience was reduced to the state of children paralyzed by fear or dread. You know, throughout his career, Hitchcock waged a steady war against the censors. They constantly watchdogged his films, and those of the entire industry. Shyko was his most problematic film, though, because he very much meant to mess with our Victorian hang-ups about such things as the bathroom and the sanctity of motherhood and the family. It's probably hard for modern viewers to appreciate that in the era in which Shyko was made, no American film had ever before shown a toilet on screen. Well, not only did Hitchcock mean to show a toilet, he meant to flush it, both for purposes of the plot, as well as to deeply unsettle the audience. I remember seeing Shyko in the 60s, and to this day, I can hear the uneasy, nervous laughter and the reactions to Janet Leigh flushing the toilet. After the very adult opening sequence of the film and the flushing of the toilet, it was as if Hitchcock were announcing to the audience, "Watch out, anything goes." Well, that message rippled through the audience like an earthquake. And to prove it, we have the shower sequence, one of the all-time brilliant and iconic sequences in the history of film. Hitchcock and his screenwriter got into a battle royal about a shot that Hitchcock edited out of the film to appease the censors. For this sequence, there was going to be an overhead God's eye view of Marion as she is dead, naked, and sprawled across the bathroom floor. Now, Stefano thought that part of the scene was heartbreaking and absolutely essential, but Hitchcock cut it to divert the censors from other things in the scene, notably the fact that at one moment the knife absolutely does penetrate the body, and also there is a glimpse of nipple. Stefano almost never forgave Hitchcock for cutting that scene out because he thought it was so emotionally powerful. By the way, at the time of the filming of the shower sequence, Anthony Perkins was in New York rehearsing to open in a Broadway musical called Green Willow. So the mother who approaches the shower curtain and rips it aside was played not by Perkins, but by veteran stunt woman Margot Epper. Now, in the overhead shots where Marion Crane is struggling to ward off Mother's knife, well, that performer is Anne Doré. Her film appearances include Son of Paleface and My Fair Lady. A Playboy centerfold named Marley Renfro, she had the same physical dimensions as Janet, also filmed on different days. That was so that Hitchcock's camera could be placed anywhere without concern for the modesty of a big Hollywood star. Hitchcock himself held the knife because he knew exactly where he wanted it to go. Janet Leigh told me that, and most people don't know that.
Mother! Oh, God! Mother! Blood! Blood!
When I was doing research for my book, Hitchcock and the Making of Shyko, I was fascinated to read Hitchcock's detailed notes for sound and music for the picture. He, before the edit happened, would dictate exactly where he thought there should be sound and music and expected his collaborators to pretty much follow his rule. Well, Bernard Herrmann wasn't the type to follow anybody's rule, and he was right at this point because Hitchcock said that the shower sequence should have absolutely no music whatsoever. But Hitchcock, to his credit, later said to Herrmann that he was right and his original suggestion for no music had been, quote, an inappropriate suggestion. Shyko won 4 Academy Award nominations, Janet Leigh for Best Supporting Actress, 1 for set decoration, 1 for black and white cinematography, and 1 for Alfred Hitchcock as Best Director. No nomination for Anthony Perkins, no nomination for Bernard Herrmann's music. That's pretty unthinkable. And Hitchcock sent a note to Anthony Perkins that said, "I am ashamed of your fellow actors." Perkins and Hitchcock worked very well together. For this particular sequence, Perkins had a lot of ideas that were his own, very specific ideas about behavior and movements. And although Hitchcock was very adamant about a pre-plan in terms of where the camera would move, and he had all of this storyboarded, as indeed he had the entire film storyboarded perfectly, Perkins had some very interesting ideas, and Hitchcock, to his credit, thought that Perkins was a very intelligent guy and would say to him, "Have you thought it out? Does it really seem in character for you?" And Perkins would say yes. And Hitchcock would let him go ahead and do that. In various parts of the film, you will see Anthony Perkins chewing candy, and that was his own idea. It's certainly not in the script. Perkins felt it was a bird-like thing to do, and since there is so much bird symbology and imagery in the movie, Hitchcock thought it was a great idea that Perkins had, and it was Hitchcock's idea to make the snack that he was eating candy corn, because he thought that's what a chicken would do, and he thought that Perkins had a neck like a chicken. In this sequence, Perkins had a very specific idea, which was almost kind of a Lady Macbeth, washing out the blood and washing out the guilt. He also felt that it married with Janet Leigh's washing off the guilt of the theft in the shower sequence that just preceded it. And Perkins was very, very smart about realizing that there was a great similarity in terms of the characters of Marion Crane and Norman Bates, a great similarity in their characters, and he wanted to play upon that. And so that's why he had this sense of wanting to present Norman Bates as wanting to wash away a crime, wanting to wash away every kind of clue, any bit of evidence that Mother had ever done something so heinous. And I remember seeing the film back in the 1960s and actually hearing women behind me. I don't know why the memory of this is so clear, but it is. But hearing the memory of a woman saying, "What a good boy he is. What a good boy he is," because he was cleaning up after Mother. And so Hitchcock knew very, very well that Americans have this issue, or these issues about bathroom and cleanliness. And so he felt that he would hook audiences into Norman's dilemma by really emphasizing this cleanup matter. Now, this particular moment, all of these moments as he gets in the car and moves toward the swamp, once again have brought a lot of comparisons with the One More Mile to Go episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. That was a very famous one in which the actor David Wayne plays a man who murders a shrewish wife and disposes of her body very much in the way Norman Bates is disposing of the body of Marion Crane, by putting her in the trunk of a car and by driving her somewhere. In the episode One More Mile to Go, though, the drive, the journey becomes the big suspense element of the piece, just as the drive in Shyko of Marion Crane to the motel is a big suspense element of the piece. Hitchcock loved the idea of swamps and bathrooms. Although they don't seem like big deals now, they seemed very big deals back then, because this is a film that really explores the underbelly, the underneath, the dark psyche of all of us. And Hitchcock felt that by showing things like toilets and a strange dark swamp, which we're about to see, he would be unsettling the audience and really dealing with issues of, bodily functions, which are things that Americans still to this day don't talk about that much, but certainly didn't in 1960. You see, Norman is very, very shrewd and smart and calculating. He knows exactly what things could be the things that would trip him up. Did she use the medicine cabinet? What's in the drawers? This is a really good sequence, too, for illustrating what Hitchcock loved to talk about is as icebox talk. And what he meant by that is that these are the things that a guy and his wife would argue about when they would go home from the theater. Well, why didn't he check the drawers? Why didn't he look in the bathroom? And he was very cognizant of that, and so he was always thinking of the audience. And so if he or the screenwriter would forget, he would always constantly say, what would the audience be thinking? What would the audience be trying to second guess at this point? Why didn't the character do this? Why didn't the character do that? Here in a sequence where you see he does very, very, very detailed, specific movement, he's really doing a number of things. He's shifting our identification to Norman Bates as a character. He's right now playing with the idea of the money. The entire audience is going, oh, the money, the money. He's going to take the money, but he doesn't know about the money. He thinks it's a newspaper. So he tosses it in the trunk. It is, as I said earlier, the MacGuffin. It's the thing that sets the plot in motion, but it isn't the plot. It isn't what the plot is about at all. Now, he does a very daring thing here, and Perkins plays it beautifully, which is he's almost wanting to test our identification with Norman Bates. Have we really made the identification? Have we made the switch to Norman as our figure? And as Norman pushes the car into the swamp, you'll see in a second, it's a really wonderful, typically Hitchcockian thing to do. He pushes it in. This, by the way, was done with a hydraulic kind of mechanism. Once the car went into the swamp, which was on the back lot at Universal, it would hook onto a hydraulic device, which was built for the film, and pull down. Now, audiences were biting their nails right along with with Perkins, who's also chewing candy. And at a certain point, the car is going to stop. And at that point, audiences were laughing, giggling nervously. What's going to happen? That's when Hitchcock knew, as he was testing this movie with audiences, and the car begins to sink, and they laugh with relief. He knew that the audience had finally switched over to Norman. We're rooting for him. We want him to get away with it. That's a pretty audacious cinematic device. By the way, I nearly bought Marion Crane's car a few years ago. It actually came up for auction, and it came with a certificate of authenticity as well as a little bill from Hitchcock for $150 saying how much it had cost him to clean the engine. I didn't actually bid finally because I didn't have a garage at the time, and I thought that the Shyko car should have the same kind of preservation and immaculate care that Mrs. Bates's corpse had, so I decided against buying it.
Sam?
Sam? Lady wants to see you.
Yes, miss?
We are introduced now to Vera Miles, who plays Marion's sister. Miles had worked with much success in Hollywood, with John Ford especially in several of his westerns. But Hitchcock used her in a TV episode called Revenge, and he signed her to a long-term contract, wanting to build her up as his next Grace Kelly. However, Vera Miles became pregnant and couldn't do Vertigo, which had been designed for her, and Hitchcock lost interest in her, but he still had her under contract, and he thought he would use her here in Shyko. He remained cordial and icy with her, but he never quite forgave her, and Miles is not only beautiful, but a terrific actress. I should point out that Hitchcock didn't lavish the kind of attention to John Gavin and Vera Miles that he did to Anthony Perkins and to Janet Leigh, and he considered these two characters stick figures who were really audience surrogates that would take the audience through the rest of the mystery. But Vera Miles is such a good actress that she makes this character her own. And she's beautifully matched by Martin Balsam, who has just entered the scene as Arbogast, the private investigator. He was trained at the Actors Studio, and he made his debut in On the Waterfront. And watch what humanity and intelligence and wit and world weariness Balsam brings to the role. He's really superb. It's a role that could have been, I don't know, just merely expository, yet he turns it into a wonderful kind of fully rounded characterization. And he's especially good in this scene at being condescending to people that he sees as small town because he's hip and urban.
Not even a hunch, just hope.
Well, with a little checking, I could get to believe you.
I don't care if you believe me or not. All I want to do is see Marion before she gets in this too deeply.
Did you check in Phoenix? Hospitals? Maybe she had an accident. Or a holdup.
No, she was seen leaving town in her own car. By her employer, I might add.
Can't believe it. Can you?
Martin Balsam, of course, was brilliant in basically everything he did. Breakfast at Tiffany's, 1,000 Clowns, for which he got an Oscar, and Catch-22. When I was writing Hitchcock in the Making of Shyko, he declined to be interviewed for the book, and he was one of the very few who did. And I understood that he was very wary of being asked about one film as if it superseded everything he had done. So I understood, but I really regretted it. You know, when otherwise sensible actors and writers talk about Hitchcock not being a good actor's director, I like to point out this sequence between Perkins and the wonderful Martin Balsam in Shyko. I could point out dozens of other scenes in his films, but it's ludicrous on the face of it because here you have two actors really working at the top of their craft. Earlier I had talked about Perkins coming to Hitchcock several times and having ideas about how to play scenes. That's the kind of thing that Hitchcock would often cut off at the knees if he didn't think the actor was intelligent and really in tune with the character. But he liked Perkins immensely and thought he was extraordinarily bright and in tune with this role. In fact, he told him at the beginning, before the picture started shooting, that he was the movie, and that if he didn't work, the movie didn't work. I love how Perkins talked with Hitchcock about, would it be okay if he stuttered and stammered over certain words that gave him trouble, like invalid or falsity. Hitchcock, of course, loved the idea, and Perkins followed through beautifully. It was also Perkins' idea to, as I said, to peck like a bird on candy corn. The candy corn was Hitchcock's idea. But, you know, the real juice in this scene, although it's beautifully written, is supplied by the pace and the rhythms between the actors. The first time they did the scene, they did it pretty much as Stefano had written it, and Hitchcock had storyboarded it. And it was done with a lot of single shots and movements that Hitchcock had prescribed in his storyboards. When they finished, the entire crew burst into applause. Perkins went to Hitchcock, though, and said, Marty and I have been working on this, and we have done something a little more improvisational and a little looser, but we talk over each other. Would you mind very much if we tried it? Hitchcock didn't mind. He trusted both these actors, and they did the scene again in the style that we're seeing it. There were still, of course, these storyboarded moments like this that Hitchcock and Perkins worked out. They wanted to exploit his sort of chicken-like neck. But the scene as it was shot the second time was looser, a little more, I was going to say improvisational, but not really. But it has a looser kind of rhythm and tone. Well, once they shot the scene, once again, the crew burst into even bigger applause. Hitchcock loved it, and he took the storyboards, tore them up, and threw them into the wastepaper basket. So much for Hitchcock being dictatorial and thinking that actors were cattle and stupid and that they only needed to be put through their paces. He truly respected both of these actors, and the scene is beautifully done. It's tense, it's funny, there's a strange kind of seduction that goes on, and it really couldn't be better.
I wasn't lying to you, Mr.
Oh, I know that. I know.
Later in 1962, Hitchcock used Martin Balsam again to do a screen test for Tippi Hedren when he was considering her as the leading lady for The Birds, and he's wonderful in that too, because he has a very kind of, once again, laid back, very conversational style that puts another actor at ease. These two actors loved working together, and this is really one of the best scenes in the movie. Superbly acted, very slyly done, and it's a real cat and mouse game between two terrific actors.
The next morning, Sunday.
Perkins loved working with Hitchcock so very much that he actually suggested that they do Shyko together as a Broadway play, because he thought the script was well written and that the material would transfer to the stage well. And Hitchcock had some interest in that for a time, but he could never figure out how to do the big shock scenes, the shower sequence and the death of the detective. Perkins also brought Hitchcock a project called The Man Who Lost His Head and hoped that they would do it as their second film together, but nothing came of it. In the mid-'60s, Hitchcock contacted Robert Bloch, who was the original author of the novel Shyko, and wanted to do a kind of successor to Shyko, grafting elements of the real-life British murderers Hay and Christie into a story of a young psychopath, a bit like Norman Bates. That wasn't going to be for Anthony Perkins ever, but the project eventually became something called Kaleidoscope, and Hitchcock commissioned several scripts, but Universal actually stopped the film from being made. Hitchcock wanted to do something that was very much like Blow Up, Michelangelo Antonioni's movie, something with really good actors who were young and kind of unknown, and he wanted to shoot it in a very loose, grainy, gritty, improvisational style. That word comes up again. But Universal thought it was a mistake, and they really pulled the plug on the project, and that was very difficult for Hitchcock.
People just come and go, you know.
That's right. She isn't still here, is she?
No.
They have a marvelous chemistry in this scene, and Perkins turns on the boyish charm, and we can see that for a minute the character of Arbogast buys it, but then he is too shrewd. He realizes that all that charm and diffidence is covering something else up, and it's standing in the window.
Change your mind?
By the way, Perkins asked Alfred Hitchcock if he could wear his own clothes in the movie. There were specific things chosen for Norman Bates to wear, but Perkins had some specific ideas about what he thought the character should wear, and what he thought the character should wear is very much like the kind of thing that he wore when he wasn't filming.
If this girl, Marion Crane, were here, you wouldn't be hiding her, would you?
No.
Not if she paid you well?
No.
Hitchcock loved the idea of filming a lot of this picture with nighttime as the backdrop, and while that gives the film a really strong, edgy, interesting black and white mode, it did cause some problems in terms of lighting. There is one sequence at the Bates Motel where Hitchcock wanted very indirect kind of lighting. And unfortunately, one of the light stands actually showed in the shot, and Hitchcock read his crew the riot act. You don't really notice it in the film unless you watch it very, very carefully. But when Marion first drives up to the motel, there is kind of a light in the parking lot that you wonder why it's there.
All right. Thanks anyway.
But here again, you see very strong light, very shadowy, chiaroscuro kind of lighting that Hitchcock really loved for this picture. The cinematography by John Russell was one of the film's Oscar nominations, and you can see why, although some critics at the time said that the film was shot in a very TV-like style. You can tell that the lighting is far more careful and far more moody than the standard TV episode lighting of the day. You always get the sense with Hitchcock that he knows where the camera should be. The camera is never in the wrong place in a Hitchcock movie. It always seems like it's, perfect for the composition, perfect for the movement, and is a flourish without really drawing attention to itself.
Oh, hello, Loomis. This is Arbogast. Is Lila there? Good, let me talk to her, please. Hello, Lila. Lila, listen. Marion was up here. Yeah, she spent last Saturday night at the Bates Motel. It's right out here on the old highway. I even know what cabin she was in. It was number 1. Well, this young fellow that runs the place said that she just spent the night, left the next day, and that was it.
Martin Balsam also diverged from the script quite a good deal, but it didn't matter because he breathes the character. He wears the hat well. He wears the world weariness well, and his kind of dogged persistence in the face of Norman Bates's sort of insistent charm and boyish charm and manipulative charm is really, a perfect counterpoint.
Back to the motel first. No, you stay there with Loomis. I'll be back in about an hour. All right, fine. Listen, you'll be happy to know what I think. I think our friend Sam Loomis didn't know that Marion was here. Yeah. All right, see you in about an hour, or less. All right, bye-bye.
once again, always mindful of the audience. The audience would say, well, he needs to check for that snoopy motel owner. And, of course, that's what he does. But at the same time, he gives subtext. This character hasn't seen Norman's taxidermy collection. Taxidermy, again, being a very shocking and surprising thing to be in a movie in 1960. It wasn't talked about. It just seemed, too odd and bizarre. But it's part of the rich meal that this film presents to the audience. It's a strange meal, and the elements don't always go together, and that's what makes it so interesting. We see that Mother is now missing. One might well, in the second or third or fourth viewing, wonder how she could have been in the window and then gone, but we won't worry about that for right now. The house is still standing on the Universal lot and draws many, many tourists year after year. Beautifully shot again, very creepy. This sequence was fairly controversial because Hitchcock had the flu, and although he had storyboarded it with Saul Bass, who did a beautiful job on this, he got the flu and couldn't go into work, and so he had his assistant director shoot the sequence, really using the storyboards. It was Saul Bass's notion that there would be shots of the detective's hand grazing the banister, because when he gets to the top and he tries to grab onto, some kind of footing, he rips the entire staircase, banister to banister, and Saul Bass thought that would be a good visual. Hitchcock saw the footage when he got recovered from the flu, said absolutely wrong point of view. The man has to arrive in complete innocence. He's snooping. He doesn't expect this to happen, and neither does the audience. This was done with a gimbal. Martin Balsam sat in a chair with rear projection. That's the way Hitchcock loved to do it in Saboteur and North by Northwest in many of his films. He loved the idea of free floating, and he didn't want it to look quote-unquote realistic. He wanted it to look stylized and bizarre.
It's been 3.
Well, are we just going to sit here and wait?
And here you have the Vera Miles character, who, by the way, is a very forthright, assertive, independent, let's get it done character. And I love that she is such a great counterpoint with Gavin's character, because he's sort of passive and slow.
Patience doesn't run in my family, Sam. I'm going out there.
Arbogast
An hour or less. Well, I'm going.
You'll never find it. Stay here.
Why can't I go with you?
I don't know. One of us has to be here in case he's on the way.
What am I supposed to do? Just sit here and wait?
Yeah. Stay here.
I also love in this scene the sharp objects and the moodiness of this and the hair blowing. It's a really good little example of Hitchcock having a good time and having a good laugh. You have to remember that Hitchcock saw this as a highly amusing movie and had a ball making it. He just thought it was a great deal of fun, even though it was a difficult movie for him because Paramount, where he had been under contract, a very lucrative, exclusive contract all through the 50s, they decided that they didn't like this project whatsoever. And they didn't want any part of it. And in fact, they made Hitchcock, if he wanted to make it at all, he had to put up the money for the film himself. So he kept the budget very low. He used his television crew, and he filmed it for about $800,000. Another great, moody scare shot.
He didn't come back here.
Sam?
What's great about all of this sequence is that it's mostly exposition. We're trying to find out what's happened to the detective Arbogast. But the moodiness, the way it's shot, the emphasis on sharp objects that recall the knife in the shower sequence, seeing the people in shadow, it really carries, an extra freight and an extra mood that Hitchcock was really expert at. So why don't they go to the authorities more often in Hitchcock films? Well, because going to the authorities is pretty dull. This sequence, though, is livened up by good character actors. You have John McIntyre, who just a few years after this would star in a very successful television series, Wagon Train, and Lorene Tuttle, who had a great career as a voice on radio for many years, and she always played the old biddy in movies. Had a really great career in film.
Norman took a wife?
No, I don't think so.
Lorene, later in her life, became a vocal coach to many actors and many successful people. And I got to know her, and I always loved that her message on her answering machine used to say, "This is Lorene. Please leave a message, and I will get back to you. Oh, eventually." She had much better timing than I do, but she was a really funny, remarkable woman. It's interesting, too, that John McIntyre, who plays the local authority here, was married to Jeanette Nolan. Jeanette Nolan, who, of course, was Lady Macbeth to Orson Welles in Macbeth and had a long career in TV and film. She also was one of the voices of Mother in Shyko. Again, various voices of different actresses were melded together, edited together, used in different sections of the film to throw off the audience. You have to remember that Hitchcock had a notion that Shyko, once audiences realized the big trick, the big surprise at the ending, that it would have a very short shelf life. And so he wanted to make sure within the film that he could play as many tricks as he could with varying the size of Mother, varying the sound of Mother. And here this scene is really about exposition. It's really about learning that Mother is dead, that she's been dead for many, many, many years. And this baffles the characters of Sam and Lila all the more because Arbogast has, after all, said he saw Mother in the window. And so they're going to call Norman. Hitchcock is having a good time in this scene. He's really parodying kind of small town life with these small town, very, very kind of laconic, simple people. And it's a good scene because it injects a note of false normalcy in a movie that is kind of a scale of abnormality from beginning to end. And so this sequence is a good counterpoint because it gives you an idea of what life is like in Fairvale, and it gives you also a chance to understand and to appreciate the fact that Hitchcock always undermined authority. He liked to make fun of police. He liked to make fun of authority figures, as he does later in Shyko with the psychiatrist. He liked to see them as people who knew the facts but never actually got the whole picture. And that's what he's doing here, as well as letting the audience in on some information that is helping to ground them in what's going on here. But we can see that the Vera Miles character, while the mystery is deepening and while she is feeling more and more concerned about her sister, she's realizing that the mystery is deepening even further than she thought.
Then took helping to the same self herself. Strychnine. Ugly way to die.
Norman found them dead together. In bed.
You mean that old woman I saw sitting in the window out there wasn't Bates' mother?
Hitchcock sort of had a divided set on this picture. Perkins and Janet Leigh would play word games with him, mostly pornographic, but very erudite word games. He doted on them. He thought they were charming and funny and delightful. He was far more difficult with John Gavin and Vera Miles. He just didn't have as much interest in this part of the picture. He thought it was very expository and it troubled him. He couldn't wait to cut back to Norman Bates, as we're seeing now, because that's where he felt that the real interest and the real power and the real darkness of this film resided. The production design, the black and white production design of this film was also nominated for an Oscar. A very audacious shot. Here is an actor at the height of his career who is playing a very, very strange, twisted role, and he lets his hips sway from side to side. He's giving us a tip about the character, but it's a very daring thing from a career standpoint. He actually asked, Mr. Perkins did, of Hitchcock, did he think this was going to be a risky career move? And Hitchcock said, it well might be, but why not try it? He was in very good hands. This sequence, once again, a very daring, bravura technical shot with an aerial view. It's really to divert the audience because they're interested in why we're seeing this bizarre perspective on the Bates house, as we've seen with the killing of Arbogast. But it is also to disguise the fact that Mrs. Bates is really a figment of Norman's imagination. She's kept alive because of his strange, twisted desire to keep her alive. That little dummy that he's carrying, what looks like a dummy, was actually a little person, an actress named Mitzi. And once again, it was an attempt by Hitchcock to vary the size of Mother so that audiences could be confused. This, once again, is a really good example of Hitchcock having a good time with the small-town life of Fairvale. It's juxtaposing bizarre behavior and a bizarre story against church-going, very right-minded people of the 1950s. But really what he's saying in all of this film is that we are all gray, we all have secrets. There isn't any of us who is all good or evil. Even good church-going folk can harbor dark thoughts. And that's really why this scene is staged in this way. And it's also, but once again, there is exposition, there is information being put across, but it's done in a kind of almost Andy Griffith small town kind of way, which makes it all the more subversive and dark and funny, if you ask me.
Maybe I am the seeing illusions type.
No, you're not.
Well, you want me to drop you at the hotel, or?
Sam, I still won't feel satisfied until I go out there.
I like that Vera Miles' character is so assertive. It's one of the ways that Shyko dates very well. She's not the kind of character who just, will sit at home and wait for John Gavin to figure out the mystery. It's her sister who has died. She has a stake in this, and as a character, she's very direct and forthright. There was some dialogue cut from the scene that we just saw in the car. Joseph Stefano wanted to make an attempt to give the characters of Sam and Lila more stuff to do, more moments, more feeling, more empathy. And they talk in that scene that was cut. It is in the script, though, about the loss of Marion and what it would mean if she were, in fact, gone. What if she has really stolen the money and is long gone? And once again, Hitchcock cut it because he felt that the audience at this point wanted to know, what is the mystery? Who is Mother? When is she going to kill again? And they didn't want to know about Sam and Lila, so he kept cutting it back. And the performances suffer for it, or the characters suffer for it, but because the actors are doing their best, they still come across as more than what Hitchcock called stick figures. I like in this scene, too, it's very, very carefully done, how Hitchcock has exploited the physical resemblance between Anthony Perkins and John Gavin. It's a good sly, wry commentary on the fact that Norman is the psychopath next door. He looks just like us. He's not, a mustache-twirling, eye-rolling, mask-wearing demon. He's a guy just like us. It would be simple to do it the other way. In this film, psychosis, problems, mental problems, guilt, innocence, they're all matters of degree. No one is innocent in this movie, as Hitchcock felt no one is innocent in this world.
I'll go on ahead.
All right, there's your receipt. Now I'll show you the cabin.
Well, don't bother yourself. We'll find it.
I love how Perkins is constantly suspicious of these people. He knows exactly when they're driving up that they're not who they are pretending to be, because as a character pretending to be other than what he is, he's highly sensitive to anyone else who is exerting any subterfuge or pretending to be what they're not. Hitchcock was very, very careful about production design. He liked, especially in this film, to emphasize specific details within a room.
How could we prove that?
All of this stuff was researched. He had his associates go to motels, take photographs, look in the drawers of motels, even photograph the furniture, so that every detail could feel like it was within the right universe. Hitchcock didn't stay at places like this, and he found these people. He called them perfectly ordinary bourgeois people, but he was sort of intrigued and fascinated by characters like this because they seemed so far from his very lofty and sophisticated way of living. So this was kind of an adventure for him to do a film in this milieu, which is, again, very much like the 1955 film Diabolique. Downbeat, sort of dingy settings, ordinary, everyday people, and an overall atmosphere of decay, which is, I think you can see everywhere here, even in the wood and the seediness of the hotel. The costumes, again, were pretty much bought off the rack because Hitchcock didn't want any kind of couture or anything that seemed, too sophisticated or not within the buying power of the characters in the film. So they're doing some real sleuthing here, trying to figure out if they can get any glimpse of had Marion been in this particular cabin, and they kind of luck out because first time around they find an incriminating clue in the bathroom. One of Hitchcock's many overhead shots. He loved the God's eye point of view. He loved to give a scene, a kind of skewed view to keep the audience kind of at the edge of their seat and off balance. I've always found it an unfortunate contrivance that they would find the one piece of paper that would say $40,000 that would link it to Marion. It seems like Deus Ex Machina, but in a film this good, I think we can forgive it.
You'll never be able to hold him still if he doesn't want to be held. I don't like you going to that house alone.
I can handle a sick old woman.
All right, I'll find Bates and keep him occupied. Wait a minute.
Hitchcock used to talk about this film as kind of a carnival thrill ride. It was almost as if he were leading the audience through a haunted house. And it is a thrill ride in that it's a fun house filled with twisted mirrors and things jumping out at you that really scare the hell out of people. As I've gotten older, I've realized that there is horror and deep truth in those funhouse mirrors if one looks deeply enough in them. But It's very, very true that Hitchcock, in the way he presented this movie and the way he directed this movie, was really way out of his league, doing things that he'd never really done before. Very much doing something in the old dark house genre, but putting a modern twist on that for modern audiences. It's the first time we've seen the Shyko house in broad daylight. And notice how we're intensified in terms of our point of view by the subjective tracking shots. We're seeing the house as she is seeing it climbing those stairs. By this point, by the way, in 1960, movie audiences watching Shyko were beside themselves. They were talking out loud, screaming, yelling at her, "Don't go in the house." It had the effect of, kind of a massive, huge, spontaneous communal experience. Of course, we all wanted her to go in the house, but at the same time, we were dreading it. Hitchcock was very, very specific here with the production design. He wanted that sort of dark, demented Cupid at the side of the stairs and other elements.
I've been doing all the talking so far, haven't I?
Here again, he's exploiting the physical resemblance between Perkins and Gavin, showing them in kind of half face, showing them in a single shot.
Just an expression. What I meant was, I'd do just about anything to get away. Wouldn't you?
No.
Mrs. Bates?
Vera Miles here is the surrogate figure for us. She is exploring the house the way we would like to, but don't dare to. Wonderful production design here. You can almost smell this room. The Victorian furniture, the look at that statue. Everything is overwrought. Everything is highly feminine and of another era. People screamed when she opened that wardrobe. They were afraid something was going to jump out. These antiquated old dresses. You can almost smell liniment and lavender in this room. A great touch here. Very specific prop chosen by Hitchcock. Once again, playing with the idea of mirrors, multiple personalities, identities, and giving us a good scare while he's doing it. Very strange, sad shot and bit of production design here with the shape of the body worn into the mattress.
I'm not saying you shouldn't be contented here. I'm just doubting that you are.
Many lines were forced to be cut from the picture and the script by the censors, specifically dealing with mentions of Norman and his relationship with his mother, and the sense that they were more than happy, that they were, in fact, more than mother and son. Those had to go. 1960 couldn't take that. But we still get that same atmosphere. This is a marvelous sequence because we see a room that's a perfect analog for Norman, half suspended between child and man. We follow with her. We see something he listens to, Beethoven's Eroica. We don't know whether he has a Napoleonic complex, but there it is all the same. This is very, very important to Hitchcock, this particular moment. She finds a book. In Victorian days, books like this were usually pornography. Watch her reaction. We don't need to see what's on the page to know that she saw something deeply disturbing. In the Bloch novel, that moment is she does see something pornographic. But here, it's left to the imagination, and That's one of the great strengths of Hitchcock, and particularly of this picture, that although it is very direct and blatant in certain ways, Hitchcock really involved the audience, and he made the audience an accomplice. So we fill in the blanks, and we sometimes fill in the blanks in ways that are darker and scarier and far more terrifying than anything he could have spelled out for us.
Where is she?
Hitchcock, when he would do violence, would often bring the camera very, very close and make it very simple, like hitting Sam on the head as he does. Back in 1960, by this point, the audience was, I would have to say, hysterical. Once again, screaming, talking out loud. The woman behind me actually grabbed the back of my shirt. I remember really directly. And so the music goes down in tone as Vera Miles, as the character, is going into the basement. The basement here is the psyche, the id, the dark underneath, the subconscious.
Mrs. Bates.
A hugely daring thing for Anthony Perkins to do, to actually appear in drag. And many of you astute people will hear him scream, "I am Norma Bates." Something that I can assure you, you could not hear in the theaters in 1960 because people were screaming at the top of their lungs. This sequence was going to be very, very different as Hitchcock planned it. It was going to be a very long tracking shot and a relay between first a newspaper man, a reporter, and then a young guy carrying in coffee to the people in the room, and then a pan of the psychiatrist as he was moving down the corridor to enter the room. That was all simplified. Again, Hitchcock felt that audiences wanted to know exactly what was going on, and here was the scene that Hitchcock thought saved his picture from the censors. We sometimes now, hearing this scene, think it's overly didactic. We don't need to know all this information. He's explaining, of course, the dynamic between Norman and his mother and how Marion factored into all of that. And it seems long and it seems lugubrious to us, but in fact, in 1960, Hitchcock felt that the movie would never have gotten past the censors without this scene. He hired Simon Oakland, again, a very, very good character actor, to do this very, very long scene. I think it's 2 or 3 pages in the script. And it really lays out for us exactly what happened, because in 1960, this plot revelation and a plot like this was really a mind bender for the audience, and many people needed to know. They needed to be brought to some semblance of reality and some matter-of-factness. What they had just witnessed, what was the dynamic between Norman and his mother? Why did Anthony Perkins come hurtling around the corner dressed in his mother's clothes? Well, we all know the secret of Shyko now, and we can all be glib about this and say that it's, it's too talky and too wordy. And, that criticism is well taken. But it's a very typically Hitchcockian scene, really, because it's once again the authority figure who knows all the facts, who can explain all of this in black and white, but yet really doesn't get it deep down, doesn't really get how deeply, deeply disturbing this movie has been and how dark and deep the psyche of Norman is. The other characters, the officials, we don't even need to know who they are. They're police, they're county officials, they're whomever. They're what Hitchcock called the gray people, the plausibles, the people who need explanations.
But she was a corpse. So he began to think and speak for her. Give her half his life, so to speak. At times, he could be...
The sequence that we're seeing, by the way, this scene was done in one take. This actor, Simon Oakland, got all of his dialogue out rather beautifully, if you listen to it, in one single take. Once again, the crew broke into applause when he finished it, and Hitchcock, who rarely got up from his director's chair, got up, crossed the stage, shook Mr. Oakland's hand and said, "Mr. Oakland, you have just saved my picture." And once again, what he meant by that was, you have just saved this picture from the censors. In these days, in 1960, the censors really could make or break a film. Shyko was a really very dangerous game, and through it, no one was ever sure whether they were going to make it, whether they were going to pass the censors' stringent tests for feasibility and appropriateness for this to be shown to audiences. In fact, Hitchcock was so worried about whether or not Shyko could be shown in theaters. First of all, he wasn't sure whether it was good enough, and two, whether the censors would pass it, that he actually thought of breaking it into two parts and showing it on television as part of his TV show. The first part would have ended with the death of Marion in the shower, and the second part would have taken up Sam and Lila investigating the crime and the murder with Arbogast, leading to what we're seeing now. But Hitchcock, in editing the film, really realized that he had something on his hands that was special and unique. The first audiences to see this picture were really only the cast and crew members, and they hadn't seen the picture cut together. And the reactions were exactly like those of audiences in theaters. They screamed, they jumped out of their seats, they grabbed each other, and Hitchcock shrugged. He honestly couldn't understand what was going on.
Sure. All right.
This sequence, though, completely undoes the last one because it is dark and strange and takes us straight into the psyche of Norman Bates.
It's sad when a mother has to speak the words that condemn her own son, but I couldn't allow them to believe that I would commit murder. They'll put him away now, as I should have years ago.
What happens here in terms of shooting this is an entirely closed set, really a camera on an actor, and many, many people on the set holding their breath. Everyone I talked to in doing the book, Hitchcock and the Making of Shyko, said that it was absolutely eerie to be in a room with Anthony Perkins because he was so invested in the character. He was so convincing. He was so real as Norman.
I'm not even going to swat that fly. I hope they are watching. They'll see.
And here we begin to see the smile that Janet Leigh gave earlier in the film, and we see a skull. That appeared on some prints and not on others. Hitchcock thought he had gone too far, but with Shyko he had created a movie that succeeded because it went too far.